Okay, welcome everyone. This is Brady Evans. He's an amazing artist, kind of in multiple facets of both traditional art and digital art, and also a curator. So we were trying to figure out when I first met Brady, and I'm not really sure. I don't know if it was connected with University of Hawaii or the Honolulu Printmakers, or I was also on the board of Gallery Iolani, and he curated a show for them too. So very interesting guy. He also has taught, he's done workshops, he's done exhibitions, he does live digital painting to live music. So I think you're in for a treat, and he's also going to do kind of a live demo for you guys related to an assignment that you have coming up. Cool. Brady.
Hey. Thank you, Erica. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I know it's an early class, too, and we're going to be working with equipment and expensive computers and things, so hopefully everyone's awake enough to work on these things. I wanted to also say, maybe get the lights a little bit. Like as Erica says, I do a bunch of things. I don't really know myself what to call myself exactly, but I just kind of like to get in trouble is what I tell people. And if something interests me, then I'll go through it. So I've done exhibitions dealing with comics. I've done live digital performances. I also used to work at an art museum for 7 years, and I worked on caring for artwork. So I can also do that and work on handling art. But my passion, I actually quit the museum in October last year, and so to focus on my passion, which is creating art. And it's something that I've been focused on doing since probably I was around 12 years old or so, when I was like, okay, I'm going to make art, and I want to do this for the rest of my life. And so I kind of haven't really changed from that mindset. So I drew this a little while ago for another event, but hi. Let's see, I grew up here in Hawaii. I grew up in Honolulu. I went to high school here, Lutheran High School, and I went to University of Hawaii at Manoa. And I got my BFA in 2012, where I did drawing, and I also studied printmaking as well. I did not do digital painting or digital art at all in college, and I never really trained for it. So seeing you guys in this class is really cool, because I never got any formal training with digital painting. I kind of just discovered it when I was maybe 14 or 13, and then just kind of learned on my own and watched an occasional YouTube video, but mostly watching friends online around the world who were doing the same thing that I was doing, watching what they're doing and learning. And I want to emphasize that in my presentation as well, as there's so many different ways to digitally paint that it's good to look out for, to look at tutorials as well, but to also look at what people are doing, like the artwork that they're producing. And maybe trying to reverse engineer it, looking like how did they get those effects, how did they get those layers. And there's a lot of benefit in trying to figure that out too, and trying to figure out that process. So I'm going to start off by showing some pretty early work. So in 2007, I graduated high school, and I got my first tablet when I was around 14. And before that, I used the mouse, which was fun. It's MS Paint. I don't know, did anyone else use MS Paint when they were younger too? It's a pretty good program, actually. But the first program I started off with was a Japanese program called Open Canvas. And I use a Mac now, so it doesn't quite work with Photoshop. I mean, it doesn't work with Mac, so I had to switch to Photoshop when I was maybe like 18. But this is a painting I did, I think I was right out of high school, or maybe in still in high school, I forget. But I was really big into like a lot of anime and things and manga, and I'm not as much to a certain extent now, but I think drawing what they call fan art, which is existing characters in different settings and in your own poses, was really popular back then, and it really helped me to get to a point where I could practice a lot of different shapes and a lot of different settings. And so anyone recognize this series? Probably, right? So it's Evangelion, and it's and you can kind of see, I did a close-up of it, and you can see that there's line work in here too. So what I did was I started off by doing lines, and then I colored in the painting, and what I kind of found was that the line work and the painterly style didn't work as well together. And so I tried to kind of erase some of the lines in the background and tried to blend it together. But that's sort of a predicament that I still have, I feel, where I'm trying to find a nice balance between line work and painting strokes. and stuff. So when you see a lot of paintings, like fine art paintings, oil paintings, you don't really see lines as much. And in real life too, you don't tend to see lines as much when you look out into a landscape. So I think those two elements are kind of interesting to me, and maybe they've been really frustrating, but they've also led to some interesting problem-solving methods for me as well. So this one I call Skywalk. So I never really made it into a print or anything, but it was just fun practice. I love sunset scenes too, and dramatic lighting. And so I don't know if anyone recognized this series too. It's from a long time ago, like 10 years ago. It's called like Tengen Toppa Guren Lagan. It's basically a giant robot anime. And I was really big into it when I was 18. And so I did a series for Kauai Con, which is a local anime convention. And I've been participating in Kauai Con for 14 years now as a vendor. And so these were prints I did. And you can kind of notice that the print on the left here is not, there's no lines as well. And so what I did was I did a drawing first, and then I ended up just painting directly over the lines and hiding those. And I was also really into like Baroque art as well, and the kind of lighting that came about, and how during that time you saw a lot of dissolving of the paint strokes. So I really wanted to get a painterly look with digital, because sometimes digital seems kind of flat and it seems like harder to get textured looks. So I wanted to show the paint strokes a lot. And so it's a little rough, but I figured that if you looked at it from afar, you can make out the shapes a lot more. And the character Yoko on the right is kind of an homage to some German expressionist painters as well. The different colors in her. And in a lot of these paintings too, I work relatively intuitively, where I don't quite know what the colors will look like when I start, but I put colors down and I layer things together. And as I work through the image is how the colors and how sometimes even the parts of the composition will come up and resolve themselves. And I was going to show a little bit of that doing a demo later too. And some more examples of fan art. These are from Pokemon. Gold and Silver is the last Pokemon game I played, like almost 15 years ago. And it's further dissolving of the shapes and stuff. So I think at the time in Kauai Con and like the kind of anime and the fan art scene, it was kind of unusual to see a lot of dissolving shapes. Because when you think of anime, if anyone's watched anything, it's usually pretty hard lined. Like there's an outline and then there's hard colors. And I just really love the painterly style, and so I really wanted to incorporate that into the fan art and the art that I was doing at the time. And later I'm going to show a few artists anime artists or Japanese illustrators that incorporate similar kind of painterly styles that were influential to me at different points in my career. So moving right along, in 2013 I did the program cover for Kauai Con, and I worked with my friend Rose de la Cruz, and my friend did the initial sketches and character design for the 3 characters here, which are the mascots for Kauai Con. And I did the outline and colored them and added the colors as well. So it was a lot of fun to do. It was a lot of back and forth. It was like my first time working with kind of a bigger client, and it was like starting off with basic sketches and then submitting that and then showing how, what the different color schemes and things. And that's kind of how it's like when you work with a client, is you kind of have to show a lot of different options, and then they choose what they like, or if they might not like any of them. Luckily they liked some of what we did. And then from there you go to the final, because the final will take quite a long time to make. So this design was kind of fun. The theme they just said was giant robots that year. So we thought of something where it would show a space, kind of like those old Robotech anime or so, where the mecha are like gigantic, like the size of planets. We wanted to show Hawaii as being the center of this kind of a culture, and it is in many ways, I think, as a bridge between the East and the West. And so these 2 characters are kind of examples of a mixing between line art and painting style. So there is line art that I drew underneath it, but I also tried to soften some of the lines as well. So as a close-up here, you can see like the line edges here are blue and pink and beige in other areas, so there's not this black outline everywhere. And I also painted directly on top of the line as well to show that kind of mix and push and pull between shapes. So this was a really fun project, and I hadn't seen it in a few years. So when I was going through my archives, like, oh, it kind of brought back good memories of working with my friend on this. And it was kind of cool to see like 10,000 people holding your art too, and like during the convention time. I also, around this time, around 2014, I stopped doing fan art, and I started only doing characters and settings that I made up, or things that were inspired from history, basically things that don't quite have copyright anymore. So I didn't feel, I wouldn't feel any guilt in selling them because it would be 100% my work. So I'm very much influenced from Japanese culture and Japanese history at the time. I also did a lot of art history classes when I was at UH Manoa, and I took all the Japanese art history. My parents collected antiques, and so I was relatively familiar with some of that culture, had an interest in it. So that's kind of a permeating theme throughout a lot of my work. And I'm also developing pictures that have a sense of a narrative to them. So there's a setting, there's like a beach or sunset setting, a character that's dressed in clothes from 1,000 years ago. And I think for a lot of people, they kind of read into different stories, and there's no set story for me. I want people to think what they want from it and to create a story from these images. More examples of narrative. This one is inspired sort of by Eva's side, or maybe Kauai, or it's sort of plantation days, and kind of like those plantation groves where it's overgrown with just all kinds of plants and things. And I just loved the contrast between the red dirt and the colors of some of those plants and the blue sky. So that's what went into creating this print. And it's kind of cool when people come up to my booth and like, oh, this looks like a plantation Hawaii or something, or they kind of get that feeling, and it means that, oh, at least some of that concept is conveyed through the image, which I'm happy. I'm also happy if they think of something else too. Main thing, I want people to have good vibes from the art that I make, and to maybe take them out into a different place than they normally are. More narrative. I also really like drawing clothes and hands, actually. So I tend to put in hands a lot, or feet, and draw robes or people covered in clothes and things. I just love drawing the weight of fabric. This one was kind of fun because it's a red sky. You wouldn't normally see that, but yet it feels like daytime. And I wanted to play with different color harmonies. So the red, yellow, and blue, which is a triadic harmony, and something bold, which is the white sun in the corner. And if you can see it later, but the characters here are just so abstract. They're only just a few strokes, and since they're in the distance, you don't really need a whole lot to show. You can just give an impression of people in the background or in the foreground, and it gives people an idea. Let's see. And this is one of my favorite pieces I did. It's also a triadic color harmony, and it's based off of a painter that used to live in Hawaii called Charles Bartlett. He did these series in India, and the museum had a bunch of his paintings, and I would often see them in storage. And so I kind of took his color harmony and color palette and created an imagined scene of this character on the banks of the Ganges River. And I've reprinted this several times in the 5 or so years that I've had it. And I don't know, it's a print that I've always kind of liked. It just kind of worked well. So now I want to talk a little bit more about recent work. These are, I started to get a little tired of drawing figures, so I wanted to tackle animals because I hadn't really drawn them as much before. So in 2017, I did these two, along with a third I didn't bring, but it's a rooster. And I started to incorporate a lot more of traditional painting into my digital prints. So the line work here is still here. That's actually pencil that I scanned in, and I'm not sure how far you guys have gotten, but if you know how to do the select the white and then delete that, and so you're just left with the pencil lines, right? So I did that. I did the same thing for the painting. I did it on white paper. I scanned that in, and then I did the same. I selected all the white and I removed it so that it could be layered on top of each other. And so you can see elements of those paint strokes here and above. And on top of that, I layered digital paint as well. So the digital paint is more rough and more gestural, and mostly to block in shapes and to create areas of interest. And what's fun about working in Photoshop is that you can create layers of digital paint, and then you can move it around. You can enlarge it. You can reverse it. You can multiply it. You can duplicate all kinds of things. And I love that element of kind of surprise that you can get with digital painting that you can't get with traditional painting. Because once you have your paint on the paper, you can't move it around. But with digital paint, there's a lot more, I think it's a lot more open to play, which is really important, at least for me when creating art. And the same thing for the whale. I don't know if anyone went to the Honolulu Biennial, which was a couple years ago. There's the Team Lab installation. If anyone saw that with the giant whales on the floor, you could draw your own animal, and it would be scanned and worked into their installation. But my friend and I went to that, and I just loved these giant whales that they had. And I was like, I want to draw a whale, and like there's whales all around Hawaii, and I should draw a whale. And so I decided to incorporate a whale into one of the prints. And the background here is almost totally acrylic paint, so green, washes of green, and blue, and yellow, with just a little bit of digital paint added. And last year, I also worked on a series of these samurai cats, and working more into the Japanese culture that I'm really interested in. And I never had cats growing up, but my friends have cats, and I've always thought they were kind of interesting, like semi-grumpy, semi-aloof creatures. And so I thought they would fit well into the aristocratic or samurai kind of a vibe. And there's also several manga out now that are based on cats and that era too in Japan. But I sort of created a little series where I thought the cats would control the fish, and the fish would just kind of float around. And they would use them to, like, the cats had the power to hypnotize these fish and be able to use them for whatever powers they want to. For this print, the lines are ink. So I used a micron pen and a brush pen. The brush pen to kind of mimic the Japanese painting and traditional Asian painting style. And the background here are acrylic painting. You can see some of the texture peeking out here. And then on top of that, I put digital paint. So I kind of think of it like a sandwich together. I don't like it when you can tell the differences between the layers. I really like it when the layers are so mixed up that they look all cohesive and they look all one. So I like to use a lot of different layers on top of each other to show that and to make sure that things are kind of more seamless, and so they reach a little balance. It may seem a little chaotic, and I feel like I've been getting a little too chaotic lately. But to me, they feel kind of balanced, and they feel like they just mix together. And since it was the year of the dog last year, I did a couple samurai dog paintings too. Similar technique. They were done a few months after the previous two cats. I also worked more with kind of semi-abstract styles too, like the print on the left is from an image that I had of a woman walking through the forest with a boar, and it was kind of painted relatively quickly with just very intuitively. And the print on the right, which is one of the more recent prints, it uses similar techniques with digital paint strokes. So with traditional paint strokes that you can see here. I still feel like digital paint is kind of flat, so I always feel like I have to incorporate at least some kind of traditional texture, either from graphite or from ink. Like these are done with brush pen that I scanned in and then separated the layers and then masked the layer and then colored on top of it. So it just has that nice push and pull. For me, that's just kind of how I have to go about doing the prints. It's like I have to layer, and so I have this file with all of these digital paint all of these traditional paint textures that I drop in if necessary or when I want to see it. So I try to keep a bigger library of that. And this print, which I did last year, sort of based off of the lava flow that happened on the Big Island. So this one actually uses photographs and ink on paper and graphite and a little bit of digital paint on top. It was kind of fun. Let's see. Finally, I wanted to just talk about a couple influences that growing up were a big part of how I went about digital painting and how about going about my art. I really love Degas and how he incorporates line work into his paintings and his drawings, and how he doesn't really have a boundary between drawing and painting a lot of times. And I love the background here where the paint is just sort of splashed on around her face to emphasize her face, but yet it doesn't serve any realistic purpose. Like you wouldn't see that in life or so. And there's also outline on her arms and her hands here, which are somewhat realistic, but yet lend like a nice graphic quality, and it has a nice push and pull to it. about 100 years later, about 75 years later, you have Richard Diebenkorn doing similar things. And I love how he puts the yellow paint over the blue, and so you still see some of the blue underneath. So I do that a lot with my digital painting, where I'll layer the colors and you'll still see the paint on top of it, on the paint layer beneath it. And one thing good about Photoshop is that you can use multiply layers, and the colors underneath it will interact with the colors on top of it. And I brought a book of hers to Kumaori Jun. She's a contemporary illustrator, and her work is very quiet. And she does illustrations for novels and for a few TV shows as well in Japan. Actually, I'm not sure if it's a woman or not. Her name is androgynous, the kanji that they use. So, and a lot of artists are pretty secretive in Japan. So I'll just say it's a her. But what I love about her style is that she uses a lot of solid paint strokes. So these are all digital. And you can see, I'll show a close-up later, but you can see how there's just a few simple shapes here to show the lighting on the girl's face and on the top of her body, and how just using just subtle color changes can lead a nice atmosphere as well. Like this one overall has sort of a cooler gray harmony to it with this nice bright orange line in the middle. I brought a book of her works too, and it has a little demo. It's in Japanese, but the photos are pretty cool to see. And she uses Photoshop too, I think. And finally, an artist that I've known about for several years. His name is pronounced Toi Hachi, which is Toi is 10 and Hachi is 8. So October 8th is his birthday, so that's what he uses as his screen name. But what I love about his work is that it's very painterly for a lot of the illustrators in Japan. Nowadays, the illustrators are leaning more towards hard-edged, more graphic and poppy kind of illustrations. But what I love about his is that he uses a lot of nice washy tones. Let's see. You can see a close-up here. The quality isn't the greatest, I'm sorry. But there's just a few strokes here, actually, to delineate the character, and little dots here. It's very impressionistic. And it seems very quick, but yet they're placed just perfectly to give you just that right impression of light and of texture and tone. And he used to work for a very famous animation company, but now just does illustration work. So I really love following him and following his work and seeing how kind of loose and how much he pushes that style. Here's also a close-up of Kumaori Jun's work, where you can see the solid lines delineated. And it's actually, she uses a sharpening filter when she finishes, so the lines feel even more delineated, like the colors in between. There's even more of a harder edge that she purposely puts on, and it kind of gives it a nice vibration to it, where the lines, the separation between the colors aren't just flat, but they're nice and kind of semi-jagged, and I feel like they lend kind of a little bit of attention to some of her pieces, and that's something that I really enjoy. So I brought books by both her and Toi Hachi as well. We can look at later after the presentation. So that's all I have for my artwork. I wanted to show a little bit of a performance that I work on with the Drowning Dreamers band. So they're a local band run by Gary Liu, who's a friend of mine. He's also a teacher at UH in art history. And their band is sort of indie, folk. It's very contemplative music. And a couple years ago, he approached me about collaborating with them because he felt that my art worked well with their songs. So I illustrated a couple books for them. And then I also we've been doing these live performances. So I'll just show a little clip. So there's Gary. And so what I do is I project with an Epson projector, and I hook my computer directly up to it. And so I'm drawing basically live, and it's mimicking what's on my screen. So I usually illustrate around 5 or 6 songs in their set, in their set total. And what's kind of fun about doing this is that it's like the lighting and it's pretty easy to throw color, in Photoshop, like you pick a color and you throw it onto there, and then the whole room turns into that color, which I thought was kind of cool. Like it bounces off the walls. So I do this for around 45 minutes or so, this is for this little clip. We've been doing it a few times. The last time we did it was on Friday, this past Friday. And we're also doing it at the Honolulu Biennial as well. So what they do is they send me the set list ahead of time, and I have the lyrics. So what I do is I print out the lyrics, and then I put them on I look at them maybe about 20 minutes before the set, and then I circle words and do just basic sketches to start off with. But from there, I just kind of let the music and the image develop on itself and let it go from there. A lot of it is improvisational. So it's been kind of fun. I feel like I've gotten a little better at it every time, or mostly interfacing with the program live. So, because the songs are only like 4 minutes long, so it's like, okay, you have to work kind of quickly with it, and it kind of forces you to try to make dramatic strokes, because, you know, it's a show. People want to see like something, you know, a mix of things that are subtle and mix of things that are more dramatic. So I also paint on one canvas, and I just layer it over and over and over. I create a new layer, and then I draw on top of it, and I continue. So there's only one Photoshop file that I work off of. Over. But I use a lot of hotkey commands too. So I'll show you when I do the mango. But I usually do I usually work with two hands doing using my pen tablet and then also the keyboard. Okay. Maybe we can do the demo. So, okay. So I think this is the next project that Erica told me about, where it's pretty an introduction to digital painting, it seems, and it's a pretty good one. It's about copying a fruit painting, and so I just did this last night, where I chose a mango. Sorry, I'm gonna sit down. So this is the painting, and then this is the image that I found online. And I'm not sure if it's copyrighted or not, probably, so I'm just going to delete it after. It's only for demonstration purposes. So let's see. So I started off by just dragging the image into Photoshop. So you can do that by just taking the image from your desktop or from like anywhere, and then creating a new canvas, and then dropping that in. And it creates a new layer. Where is it? There. And then I just use the eyedropper tool, which is, and then chose different colors based on it. So I just picked random colors here, like in different areas. And since it's a digital image, there's a bunch of pixels that you can choose from. So I usually like to pick up a few different colors. Made this nice color palette over here. Let's see, I'll show you the layers of what I did for the mango itself. So the mango painting is more of, I guess I didn't start with an outline at all. I just worked from a shape and then worked on coloring it from there. At least that's how I went about it. A lot of times for my digital paintings is I'll start off with a ground, like a brown or a beige ground, which is what you do in oil painting. You kind of wipe the screen, wipe the canvas and give it like a ground, so you're not working with just white. So what I'll do is I'll go backwards, and so this is the top layer, just a normal layer. This is a multiply layer. I like to use multiply layers a lot, and then normal layers on top of that. The multiply is, I like to think of the multiply layer as sort of like taking pieces of cellophane and putting it through the light and looking through it. So it makes it darker, but you also get some color combination too. I'm not sure if that's an accurate way. That's how I kind of think of it.
We talked about blend modes. Do you guys recall multiply?
Multiply is good for adding shadows sometimes, especially if you're doing a harder, like a more what they call cell shaded or like solid color painting stuff. Because if you do like a blue, it kind of automatically harmonizes because you have the colors interacting with each other. Like you put a blue over a red and you create like a purplish kind of color with multiply instead of just going with black or something or a gray for a shadow. There's a lot of times shadows, when you see them outside, they're oftentimes blue or warm, depending on what atmospheric conditions or colors are around it. They're rarely, you never really see like a gray shadow. They're generally like purple if you really look closely, like a light purple or something. So for the mango, I just kind of went from large to large shapes and more detail. So I started off with just the shape of the mango, adding in more and more. So this was the base that I started off with. Maybe I can go upwards. Kind of weird, but okay. So maybe I'll try and do another. Oops. Okay. So I'll start off with a color, actually, let's try to do something fun. Let's start off with a darker color first. I kind of just like to block it in. I use a lot of hotkeys. So the ones that I like to use the most are like to make the brush larger and smaller, you use the brackets on your keyboard. If you guys have kind of played around a little bit with the program, because it's easier to get like when you're just kind of on the fly and drawing, you don't have to, go to up here and like change the size and blah, blah, blah. And so I'll start off with like a larger color. And I also use eye for eyedropper a bit too. And then back to brush. I like to just block in shapes first. And I also like to kind of do this kind of a cross-hatching thing too. The mango here has a nice sort of like a spotted texture. So I kind of like to explore that when I was doing it last night too. It was kind of fun. I don't tend to use I know like in Erica's presentation, the guide for this, it says using the blend tool. The blend tool is really good too, or the blur tool, I think, which is here, or smudge. Can make it larger, smaller. But one trick I like to do is, let's see, I'll show it here. I'll create two colors. Let's try, you can do red. And then you kind of lightly paint over the middle, sort of, and then you just grab the color that's in here. And then you can create, and then you can kind of use it to blend. So I kind of like to grab the color that's sort of on the edge. And then you create like an in-between color. So I'm kind of constantly doing that, actually, when it comes to blending. I also like to introduce kind of, I don't like to stay too close to reality, if that makes sense. I think with a painting, you can add in or emphasize certain things when drawing an object too that compositionally make sense in a picture or so. So like, for example, when you see like this, my painted mango compared to the one in the photo here, I thought that it would look kind of cool if this area here was darker and stuff, and it brought out that kind of a shadow that's sort of here. There's a reflected light up here, but it's not as emphasized. I also didn't use white, because this mango was probably photographed in a white box, in a reflective white box, and so it reflected a lot of white from the background. But I thought it'd be cool to give it more of a light yellow. So I emphasized the bottom here, the lighting over here, and also on the top left corner here. So to make it more dramatic and to make it feel more like there's more contrast in the picture. So for the mango here, I'm just going to grab like little swatches. And then adding in the darker tones at the top. And you notice too, I'm also doing like small strokes as well, like this. And I'm going with the shape of the object. So that's kind of a drawing technique that some of you probably picked up in like one of the drawing classes of contour shading. And I think that really helps when it comes to getting it really helps when delineating the forms and helping it to not look so flat. Okay. So I'm going to create another layer and do multiply layer. And we'll try do a lighter, let's see. If anyone has any questions too about what I'm doing, feel free to speak up too. I know I'm going kind of fast. But the multiply layer here, I like to do subtle buildups as well. I don't like to do too many dramatic color changes. I like to have more control over things. I'll create another normal layer and kind of paint over that. Make the brush smaller. Add in some orange. Give it a little bit of an outline. You can see slight kind of reflected, kind of like a slight shadow on the edge here. And then I'll create a new layer for the leaf. I could create it on the same layer, but we'll just in case we don't like it, we can move it around.
So just to clarify, Brady, Brady didn't start with an outline. When you guys actually look at this assignment, it says start with an outline. You don't have to, right? You don't have to start with an outline. But he said he's starting with simple shapes. Obviously, these aren't necessarily geometric shapes, right? He's kind of, if you guys squint at the image, it will really simplify it. And you can see organic shapes of color, right? And different shades as well, right? Tints and shades popping out. And then just using a lot of layers, so you guys can always change it and move it. You can even use a selection from the original fruit if you want to, right? And then use that to clean it up near the end if you want to.
So one trick I like to use is the Navigator tab, which it might be a default, already be open, but you can open it up in Window Navigator here. And I like to look at this every so often, back and forth, to see how it looks. It kind of mimics as if you were like stepping back from the canvas stuff, which is what you do in oil painting as well. Because I like to see how things look overall and how the overall composition's looking. So I often use this. And it also is easy to move around the canvas too. So like if I wanted to go, if I was really zoomed in or something, if I wanted to move it to here, around, it's pretty easy. So it serves to do a purpose.
Did you guys understand what he was talking about in terms of the direction of his shading that he's pulling in? So it has to do with the contour, the outline, right? So creating hatching that sort of mimics the curve of the shapes that he's painting. And then cross-hatching would go against that. But if it's a round object, it'd still be curved, right? That's how it supports that curved surface.
And create another multiply layer, and then start to add in some of the shading in the leaf. I don't know. The leaf for me last night was the hardest part. Just because there's all those little ribs in it too, and there's like a little subtle, delineations of color and of light. Let's see. I also like to include sometimes, like for shading, using, like for instance here, I just use the green from the leaf, and am using it in the multiply layer to shade the leaf itself on here because it's a cool color. And I also like to use colors from other parts of the painting to kind of cause it to be a little more balanced. So like for instance, I'll put a little, even though it's, you don't quite see it in the painting, in the original painting, you see that I'm adding in a little bit of red into the leaf and giving it kind of a more brown tone. I feel like it makes the painting a little more, it just makes it a little more harmonious. So. And just adding in those little strokes that, I don't know, I kind of have a habit of doing it a lot.
What are you guys wondering as you're watching this?
So you use just one brush the entire time, just change the size?
I tend to, yeah.
Do you have a particular favorite?
I like to use, well, this particular brush, it's basically where the opacity and the size are regulated by the pressure of the tablet. I know a lot of people are like, oh, don't use the round brush or something, like, oh, like that's for beginners or something. And I have been using it like my whole time and stuff, but I don't know, I feel like I just kind of get really close to some things, like I'll zoom in and then kind of create my own little textures regardless of the size of the brush or the type of brush. Although lately I have been kind of playing around with some of the non-circular brushes, and they're kind of fun to play around with too. But I'm so used to just creating texture and shading with the round brush.
Another way of blending that I sometimes use, and I don't know if you do this, Brady, but sometimes I don't always have a tablet when I'm painting either, and I don't know if you guys have a tablet at home, if you'll be finishing this, right? So sometimes I just play with how soft the brush is and opacity too, because that can,
opacity is good.
that can also kind of help blend one color to another.
Yeah, for this mango, I used a couple different like oval brushes, and I also played with opacity, so you can kind of get that effect through, like you can kind of see it looks a little bit like watercolor, like layers of washes. So that's you go up here in the brush flow and you change the opacity down. And what it does is that it just takes more strokes to go over it to create the, so like you can keep going over it to get over. Whereas if it was at 100%, you would immediately go with the darkest color. Whereas if it was 20%, it gets lighter, and then as you go over it more and more and more, it gets darker. So it kind of has a more pastel feel to it.
Good questions. Any other questions that are coming up as you guys are watching? Are you ready to try? You want to practice yourselves a little bit?
Yes.
Yes. Brady, are there any other last minute tips before we let them try a little bit?
I like to think of the painting as like a real painting on canvas. So what I do is instead of like worrying about layers, I just create another layer and paint on top of that. And so for example, like if I wanted to clean up this side, I just created a new normal layer and then I just use white and then cover it up or whatever the background color is. And that way I can get kind of a more, like it looks sort of like the reflected light is coming off of it at the top. So I do that as well. The reason why I kind of took up painting, this kind of more painterly style, was that I really didn't feel like, I don't know, I couldn't color in the lines when it came to like doing the line work and then coloring inside of it, and I just really wanted to go and have more fluidity and more organicness in the painting, in the kind of illustration I wanted to do. So I tend to have a little bit more of a freeness when it comes to digital painting, and when it comes to that, I start off with line work, but I use it basically just as a framework for the picture. and to get composition. And a lot of times if I want lines, I'll like just add it in on another layer like this or something. And sometimes that can be cool. I've seen some artists do that as well.
Just to clarify a few other terms that Brady's been using, because I'm not sure if you guys are all aware of it. So he's speaking about like value-based terms, which we usually talk about before you do this assignment anyway. I asked you guys to download an actual picture of some kind of fruit that you'd like to paint, right? So with those photographs, usually there's a highlight. That's where the light's hitting the object most directly. It's the brightest part on the object. There's usually a core shadow, and if you squint your eyes, I know we're just looking at his painting mostly right now, but where do you guys think the core shadow is on the mango? Where's the darkest part? There's a few. So under the leaf, this is actually a cast shadow from the leaf, right up here. So ignore that one for a second. That's a different kind of shadow. Just on the mango itself, where's the darkest part? You think it's at the base? I mean, people might think it's at the base. Base of the stem. Okay. And that one, yeah, that might. I mean, that's a tricky spot because that's like puckering in, right? How about just on the round shape itself? It's tricky because it's multiple colors, but oftentimes the core shadow is kind of in the center or a little bit off center of the object. And the reason that it's often not on the very edge, like you might think, is because of this reflected light that he was talking about. So whatever the mango's sitting on is actually bouncing back light onto the mango. So you guys can see that a little bit up here, right? It was probably in a white box. If it was a colored environment, it'd be a little bit different color. And if it was darker, you could probably see some reflected light on these sides too. This picture actually, it looks like they eliminated the cast shadow, right? So the mango itself would normally cast a shadow on the environment too. Mm-hmm. And then there's a bunch of transitions in between, so. And I think he was talking about the Honolulu, the Hawaii Biennial that's coming up, actually again. So that's every 2 years the Honolulu Museum of Art puts it on. And
oh, it's just a separate foundation, but the Honolulu Museum of Art is one of the places that you can go to experience it.
And so the last time it was on, it was at a bunch of venues around town. I don't know if you guys went to it, but I will be offering some extra credit with some directions, and that will be actually over spring break, I think, when it's up. So, okay, let's give you guys some practice, shall we?
Okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna turn the lights on. I forgot to give you your light.
Oh.
Yeah, can you give the lights, please? I made you perform first.
Oh, thank you so
Yeah.
much. That's great.
I'm sorry, I forgot. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I forgot a late to teach you.
And Brady's gonna be here, and I'll be here. So as you guys are trying this with your own fruit, feel free to ask us questions. Right? We'll wander around and help you out. Is there anything else that you remember?
Yeah, sure. After you guys are done too, if you want to take a break, I brought some of my illustrated books as well. I have a couple copies, and then I brought some books of those illustrators that I mentioned that are kind of cool to look at for color ideas or for just what's possible with digital painting. So feel free to take a look at some of these.